Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. And thank you if you're joining us on Zoom also. How this is going to work in just a minute, I'm going to hand it all over to Meredith. And she's going to lead us through our events for this evening. When we get to the Q&A portion, or if those of you on Zoom have any questions or comments as we're going along, just put them in the chat or in the Q&A box, and I will read them to Meredith when the time is right and she can respond like that. So without further ado, I think you don't really need an introduction, but here's
Meredith Hall. Thank you very much for coming. I'm going to take this down now with great relief. Hello, everybody. It's very nice to see all of you. You know, in-person events, I've done, I don't know, dozens of Zoom events with this book, and they're such a different experience. So it's very nice to sit with all of you tonight. And I like a small group. It's good. We'll have a nice conversation. I checked in with these two women. Can you tell me if you have read the book? Yes, perfect. Okay.
I'm reading.
Okay. Okay, yes. And another woman here is reading it. So, okay. So, excuse me. How I would introduce this book, I think, is to say that it is, it's a look at a family in a very intimate environment as they move from a state of sort of innocence, almost an Edenic innocence, and then experience a tragedy in the family. And I became very interested as I wrote in watching the harm that's done, the damage that's done to this family, which is a very well integrated family when they move into this tragedy, and how dramatically they are upended by this tragedy. And each of them thinks that they are going to respond, would respond well to kind of heroically to a terrible event like this. And of course they don't. I think it's quite human that we don't actually do that. So the book, as you know, is written in 3 voices. I had written a memoir. This is only my 2nd book. I taught writing at the University of New Hampshire for many years, and to undergrads, and then ultimately to MFA students. And I taught in the graduate program for, I don't know, 10 years probably. And during the end of that time, I started writing myself. I had not ever really considered doing the writing myself. I loved teaching, and my identity was teacher. And a colleague actually at the university challenged me to start writing, and I sat in on his graduate workshop with my graduate students. So that was pretty fun. And from that, I wrote an essay, and this wonderful colleague was so enthusiastic, I sent it out, and it won the Pushcart Prize that year. And sent another one out that winter that I wrote in that workshop, and it was in Best American Essays. And that was all it took. I thought, oh, I like this. This is really fun. And so I secretly applied for a writing grant from A Room of Her Own Foundation, which no longer, unfortunately, offers this grant. There are only 3 cycles, I think. I think I was the 2nd of 3 people who received this grant. But it was a $50,000 grant given to a woman who would not otherwise be able to take time off and write full time. I had to work for income. And I headed out to San Francisco. I had a couple kids out in the Bay Area, and I wrote this memoir during that time, and it did very well, and it just launched this world. I found as soon as the memoir was done, I wrote the memoir in 5 months, and I thought, this is just terrific. I'm going to launch myself into a 2nd book. I was already feeling so exposed with the memoir that I made the decision to move into fiction. Without a Map is a very intimate story. And some of you are nodding, you've read this book. I believed, and I think it was pretty realistic, that nobody would ever see this book. Publishing a book is hard. It's hard to have that happen. And I didn't think anybody would ever read this manuscript or this book. And so I spoke very frankly. And when that was done already, by the time it came out, and I was already launched into a lot of public conversation about it, traveling across the country for a couple of years. And I got cold feet about it finally and said, I need to switch to fiction and give myself a little more privacy and protection. I was shocked as I finished Beneficence to realize that I actually feel more exposed with Beneficence than I did with my memoir. And some of you are also nodding here. I realized that what I did, it took me probably 4 years to write this book off and on. I had very busy other parts of my life, so I couldn't just sit and write it. But it affected me very profoundly while I was writing it. I found that the grief that this family experienced, first of all, I found that this family became my family. I loved them all together too much. And I loved home, and I loved our kitchen, and I loved our front porch, and I loved the barn. And then this awful thing happened to us. And it really, really carried me down the river. I found that I experienced a very profound grief as I wrote this book. And it was only afterwards, as readers started asking me questions about it once the book was published, I knew that I felt exposed, but didn't understand why. And readers started asking me about the correlation between the loss of this child and the loss of a child that I had when I was 16, who was given into adoption. And of course, the light went on. I thought, well, of course, we just write our story, whether we know we're writing it or not. So this is really close to the bone for me. It is an intimate book. Again, I had no idea how intimate. I find that because it's not directly my story, because I had no idea it was my story. I've never known these people. I've never known these events. I've never known anything like this particular story. It allows me to talk about this book in ways that were more challenging for me with the memoir. These are my characters. I can talk about Phuc and not feel so directly involved. So it's written in those 3 voices. I made the decision, it was my first novel. I taught in the graduate program, I taught narrative writing to both nonfiction and fiction writers. So it was essentially storytelling. So I worked with a lot of fiction writers, but I thought going into it, how hard can it be? I've read fiction all my life. I read intensively. This is going to be okay. I know fiction. I understand how it works. And I found that I had a great deal to figure out. And one of the things I didn't understand I should have figured out is that it's very difficult to write in multiple voices. And I launched into that very naively. I had no idea that I was walking into potential trouble. And I actually loved it. I would do it again. I found it very freeing. I initially imagined that kind of book where one character tells part of the story and another character or two kind of respond to it, and they make corrections and they bring their own subjective experience to it. And right away, I lost interest in that. It felt almost like a debate. And so I moved away from that immediately and just moved into this sort of storytelling mode. These are all storytellers. They love to tell stories. What happened this morning, what's happening this afternoon, and what happened 20 years ago. And that's a storytelling that I love. And I just gave them free rein and let them go. I had no plan, absolutely no outline. The only thing I knew going into it was that a tragedy was going to hit this family. And I imagined that Phuc was going to misbehave in some way. And I was very interested in, I brought condemnation to him from the start. How can he live with himself? How can he go to bed at night having brought harm to his family in the face of this kind of harm? And I quickly figured out that I was projecting my own father into this story, wondering how can you do this and how do you explain it to yourself? An estrangement that he brought to me when I was 19 for the rest of my life. And I backed away from that, saying that's not the story I want to tell. And I thought, actually, honestly, at that point, I thought Phuc was going to tell the whole story. I thought it was going to be in his voice. That's what I was interested in. I was interested in the psychology of this man. And then when I sat down to write, I was shocked that Doris, I literally sat down and opened my computer and sat back. I'd been thinking about all this a lot. And a woman named Doris showed up on the page and took over. And and just claimed the beginning of the book. And in that opening, she was the one who introduced me to Phuc. And it became very clear to me that she was completely in love with him and liked him and respected him, that they had a very intimate and trusting relationship. And I realized that I needed to rethink Phuc completely. So it was Doris that did that work for me. And then I decided with the 3 children, that's too many voices. What to do with the child who disappears from the story became problematic. So right away, I settled on Doris and Dodie and Phuc in that order through the book. So I think I'll start right away with a reading from the beginning of the book. The book starts in 1947, so I'm going to pick it up there.
Before you start, everyone here okay with that you're on? That's okay.
Yes,
Correct.
you're okay. And this is Doris's voice as she introduces this story. And it takes place in this fictional town of Allstead, Maine. If you drove yourselves crazy trying to figure out where Allstead is, it does not exist intentionally. I did not want to somehow dilute my story with people having a pre-familiarity with this place. I imagined that this took place someplace in the mid-coast area of Maine and fairly close to the coast, and because of the scenes down by the water. So this is Doris speaking. And if you just put your hand up, if you can't hear me as I go along, just signal to me so I know you can hear this. Every morning early, when Phuc and I get up to start our chores, the whole house still quiet and the children asleep, I turn and pull the bed together, tugging at the sheets to make them tight and smooth. They are warm with our heat. I slide my hand across the place my husband slept, drawing the blankets up and closing in the warmth like a memory of us until night comes when we will lie down together again. Our room has big windows on the back of the house, looking out on the near pasture and the creek running through it. It is very nice to stand first thing every morning looking out over the land. The trees along the hayfields look like ghosts some summer mornings when the ground fog hugs the warm earth. And then the mist slowly drifts up and away so that by the time I am doing breakfast dishes, the sun makes sharp shadows of the fence wire like long, neat stitches binding us to this place. Phuc and I have enough sense to know that we are blessed people. You cannot know what will come. Once, when Sonny and Dodie were just toddlers, both of them locked themselves in the milk room by mistake. Phuc was busy in the north pasture. I could hear the tractor in the distance working. That must have been the year he bought the new tractor, 1938. And I was the one who was supposed to keep an eye on the children. I always did. I learned as soon as Sonny was born that when you have a child, your own life diminishes to just about nothing, and willingly so. Growing up, you are so full of dreams of what your life will be and how you will use all those years that sit like a promise. And always it is you at the center. And then you get married and those dreams change, but still you have big ideas about it all. Maybe the farm will extend, or you will have enough money to take the train to Sarasota one winter, or you will be paid by folks to cut and sew dresses and skirts you've learned how to copy from magazines. We can't ever know what will come. You meet a man and marry him and find out whether you made a good choice or not. If you did, you love each other and work hard, and then you have your first baby, and whatever it was you ever dreamed about changes the first time you hold him and feed him and watch him study your face. Sonny came when I was 19 years old, and I forgot forever any of those things that I had ever thought I wanted. I felt as if I were God, making such a good world for our children. When Sonny came, and then Dodie, and later Beston, I was willing to leave the life Phuc and I had and let my children take that place. I am more than willing. So that morning, the children were out back with me while I hung out the clothes. This was before Beston was born and about the last year before we got the washer. I heated water on the wood stove in the kitchen and lugged it out to the back dooryard and did the washing on the pump platform. The kids liked laundry day. It was all play for them, dipping little cups into the water and pouring it out on the dry gravel. On a warm morning, you could watch the water disappear like a stain from cloth. I pumped cold water for rinsing and poured it over their head, poured it into the tub, and Sonny and Dodie would beg me to dump some over their heads, with them shrieking and running away. It was a game we played every laundry day all summer. The kids would get soaked and muddy, so it was all a good morning for them. Well, that day they got bored, I guess, and wandered off without me realizing. I never even noticed they were gone. I had carried the basket of wrung clothes over to the lines and was pinning them up when I suddenly heard nothing but the breeze rustling the wet cloth and the soft sound of the distant tractor. Like a terrible dream, your worst dream, that moment of inattention when you had forgotten for 1 minute that you are the mother, the one whose single purpose it was to keep your children safe, and that awful silence that jolted you back. I remember feeling so helpless, as if I couldn't fix this no matter what I might do. I ran to the kitchen door and then back to the pump and then turned toward the noise of the tractor so far off in the field, as if Tup could pluck my children out of the air. I needed Tup to give me a shake and tell me to think. And then I was back inside myself again, and I could say, they can't have gotten to the creek yet, so wherever they are okay. After that, it was just a story like all mothers have. That cold fear when your child takes off from your sight for just long enough to scare you into thinking you have lost him forever, and you know you are a terrible mother who cannot keep your children safe. I called and called, Sonny, Dodie, turning slowly in place so my voice would carry across the whole yard. And then I heard Sonny's little yell from the milk room, Mama, Mama. As scared as I was, I heard the panic children feel when they have moved beyond the reach of their mother's protection. I'm coming, I called, running to the barn. You silly ducks, where are you? I called in a false and cheerful voice to reassure them and to dispel the terror that had caught me, to assert that this was just an accident, a small event Tup and I would laugh over with relief when we shared supper. I could hear the door to the milk room rattle, and when I lifted the latch and pushed the door open, my children pressed their tearful faces into my apron, their arms clasped around my legs, the sweet animal smell of fresh milk tumbling out the door around us. My silly ducks, I said, stroking their tight little shoulders and hair wet from our laundry day game. It's all right. But I still remember the sound of my cries out into that sudden silence and of Tup's tractor off in the north pasture, so far away. So one thing I'd like to note there is that if you have read this, this is clear foreshadowing of very specific events, the tractor in the distance, Tup not at home, the cries going out over the field, the losing of a child. It's the psychology of writing is fascinating to me. I wrote this story, that part of this chapter, absolutely blind. I just thought it was a story about the kids being lost in the milk room. I didn't see anything beyond that. And I had no idea until the book was published and I started doing readings that I said, oh, look what I did here. I had no idea. So the psychology is really fascinating. The story is making in ways that we don't know. And I write in a very, very deep, I call it the tunnel. I write in a very deep, far away place. It's a very isolated place and away from people and all my relationships. I don't read during this time. And there is something very profound that goes on in that story making. I've come to respect it very much. It's quite an awesome thing to see that I did not control this at a conscious level. So, I'm going to make a couple other comments and then see if you now would like to come into the conversation, and we can go wherever you'd like to go. And if not, I can do another reading and make some more comments. So I told you that I was interested in top. I spent a great deal of time after my memoir came out thinking about the story that I wanted to write. And I searched, I felt like a dog prowling. I prowled and could not find the story that I wanted. And something would catch me and I would think about it. And right away, I just knew it wasn't something that was going to hold me. And when I tumbled on this story, it was from something the man in Pownell. I lived in Pownell, and he said something to me about an event that had happened years before, a man that he knew. And I suddenly got the idea of this man who would do something wrong, make a bad and selfish decision. And I understood right away that what I was looking for was a morally ambiguous story. I wanted that complexity. I did not want to, I wasn't interested in wrestling with a storyline that wouldn't tangle me up. And this one certainly, by the time I was done, we can talk about the events in this book. I don't have, it's certainly a book about forgiveness and about beneficence, but it's a hard road and not a clear road. So, one of the things that I might mention here is that I don't know dairy farming. I don't know a farm. I didn't grow up on a farm. And this is somehow, any of you who have lived in Maine for many decades, it's just something we know. It just is a familiar world, and it was an effortless world for me. I think that the family space in that house and the beautiful, beautiful land around it was in some ways a kind of dream all my life. This is the life I wish that I had had. And I had the delicious experience of writing my way into a place that was just home for me. It was just so comfortable. But one of the things that caught my attention was the work of this place and the solace and comfort that it brings to this family, even before the trouble comes. They understand from the beginning, we work together. This is an enterprise that requires all of us. We're skilled at it. And nobody speaks about this work as a burden. It is not a burden to them. It is a choice they make, and they choose to do it well and very thoroughly. And they choose to draw the children into it as a way of living as a family. And it's something that I realized as I wrote it, I admire it very much. And I also find the rhythm of this work extremely comforting. It's, I think that the rhythm of each day and of each season, and then year by year as they improve the farm, those rhythms are somehow, I think, replicating rhythms in our own experience of life. And so those rhythms of work become very important to them, and they were important to me as a writer. The beauty of the land, that natural beauty that is, it is so intuitive for me. I search out wild beauty and spend a great deal of time alone in wild beauty. I need it, and I am nourished by it. And so it was very natural for me to bring this family into a place where they recognize, every day they recognize the beauty of this place. And not just the gifts that the land brings to them, and it certainly does. It's very generous land. It's good farmland and generous land, but also the sounds at night and the fog that Doris mentions in the first page, the beauty of that fog in the morning. They're very aware of how graced they are to live in this physically beautiful place, in this private place. The road comes down past their farm, but to nothing. It dead ends in the fields of a neighbor's farm. So they really do not see anybody. This is a really an island of existence. And that's something that I had not intentionally written, but I think replicates in some way the sense that I had when I raised my children on a little homestead, that this was the safe place apart from the world. And they participate in community events, but they really are, and church events, mostly church events, but they are really apart from that world. So I think that's a good place to open this. If any of you would like to ask a question or make any comments about things I've said or from your reading questions. Yes.
When you're done writing the story of these characters, do you feel completely done with them?
No. No, not at all. It's diminishing now. This, the book has been out for a year and a half, but when I first finished, I felt truly an aching homesickness for this family and this place, and just a tremendous reluctance to let it go. It was so fully real to me, and I miss these people. When I read, it feels as if I'm getting to visit for a short time. And the depth of my knowledge of these people is something that interests me. That psychology is very interesting to me. One of the joys of fiction is that, I made this story up out of thin air. It was a joy. When you write fiction, anything can happen. Anybody can live inside this book. And I loved that. I found it joyful to sit down, and I have no idea what's going to happen today. And I have a habit when I write, when I walk away from my desk at the end of the day, I stop even mid-sentence or mid-paragraph intentionally, so that when I sit down again the next morning, I don't have to have a plan. I don't need to know what's next. I need to finish that, and it sweeps me on to the next thing. I never, ever had trouble coming up with an idea for what was going to happen. It's an extraordinary freedom. Anything can happen. Just sit down. I've often thought when we're with friends or family and story tell, it's an effortless thing. Somebody says something and another person says, yeah, when I was 10, I remember my uncle, and off that person goes. And somebody else says, that happened to me too. Last week I was talking to somebody, and off we go, right? We are storytellers. And I didn't understand fully until writing this book how fully I am a storyteller and how much I love it. So these double spaces on the page, this is episodic writing. Every time there's that double space, I've simply blinked my eyes and woken up someplace else, and I'm on to something else, right? It's over and over and over again. If you look through the book, there are hundreds of those breaks. And sometimes this is during that time of tremendous trouble, and you can see how short the passages are because the mind can't stay with it, right? It's fractured. But these people came out of thin air to me, and just sort of took up home inside me. And yes, I miss them very much. Yeah.
I absolutely adored the sense of place, the home, the sense of industry related to the home and the land. It was a part of my childhood,
Wonderful.
all of that. And
Wonderful.
so there was, as I was reading this, I felt such a deep longing for that time in my life.
Yes.
When my parents were still here and I was a child. And it was just so achingly beautiful and tragic and sad, and I couldn't look away.
I'm very honored to have you say
Oh my
that.
God.
I hope I got that world right
Oh,
for
you
you.
did?
Yes.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah.
Yes. And the other thing I wanted to say, I'm a teacher. I read a lot, and kid books, adult books, and I've only been to hear one other author speak of had to see who wrote
Great.
those beautiful words.
Great, thank you.
And I don't have that book because the only way I read it was on my Kindle. Getting that book because it will live on my bookshelf like that other book lives on my bookshelf where I went to see that author speak.
Wonderful.
It's
Great.
beautiful.
Can we ask you who that author was?
You know, I wish I could remember.
I know that feeling. I can't tell you how many
I
times.
know the name of the book.
What is that?
Over the Moat. It is a love story about an American working in Vietnam and falling in love
I don't know the
with
book.
a woman there.
I'll look it up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it was years ago.
Yes.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
And yeah, just bravo.
Thank you very
And-
much.
And I
Thank you.
also, I loved Without a Mouth.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And
You know,
God
this,
bless
thank you very much. I appreciate that. This book, because Dodie is one of the voices, the book speaks about a child's experience a lot. And I recognize I live in nostalgia. You know, it's just, I think that we make a very, a wrong step in thinking that childhood is a time of joy and innocence and happiness. I think that childhood is a very complicated time and a very magical time. I don't think children are undeveloped us at all. I think they are their own very, very special creatures. And it was very thrilling to me. I felt as if Dodie allowed me to come along into her experience of childhood. That moment when she is up on the ledges across the road with Sonny and Beston, it goes through that sort of disconnect, that alienation, when suddenly looking out over the farm and the farmhouse and even her bedroom window leaves her feeling floating and unattached, quite frightened. And it's only in coming back and seeing her little brother, who is lying there looking out over the farm from such a height and a distance, that he's euphoric with it. He just thinks this is the most beautiful, magical thing. And she understands that he's experiencing joy and she can reconnect to her life through that. And then what she hauls herself back to is her underwear in her top drawer. It hauls her back and roots her, you know, but childhood is it's a complicated place. And I think it is a privilege to allow Dodie to pull us into that world. I have thought a great deal about what book comes next. And I have given thought to Grace, who, if you've completed the book, Grace is a child who is left entirely unaccounted for. And I would like to know what happens to Grace and what happens between Grace and Tup, if anything. And so that holds my attention. And Beston is such a silent boy and a grief-filled boy. He finally gets out at 16. It's the sorrow in the house is more than he can bear. And his leaving, in fact, is part of what finally shakes Tup and Doris into regaining their responsibilities as parents. But Dodie really interprets Beston for us. And we know him mostly through the story she tells us about him and the descriptions that she gives us. So Beston interests me. We leave him in Boston making music and working at a printer's, and that's a new world. I'm interested in that. But the children do interest me very much. Any other comments at this point? We can go into that more. Shall I read another passage? Okay, let's see. This is the passage about the family going skating and Tup skating off down the river. Doris is a woman who, and we see signs of this in that opening passage. Doris feels that her children are safe in this island, this stronghold. She describes it as a stronghold that they've created. They will be safe there if nothing comes in from outside. And of course, although the children coming in from outside aren't the problem, they're not the cause. There are children there from outside when this disaster, this tragedy hits. Phuc feels that there is something inside him that there is a darkness that might potentially hurt his children. And he struggles with this. He can't name it. And I believe that in almost all circumstances with his children, he can be short-tempered and he can scold his children. But his devotion and humor, his willingness to teach his children and not use them as labor on this farm, they work together on the farm, his obvious love of their mother and respect for their mother. I think that in most ways, Phuc is a very good guy, even though we see him on edge sometimes with the children and with Doris, actually. I intentionally allowed him to misbehave in these ways. I didn't think it would be realistic if he did not. It is his sense that there is something lurking that might bring harm. And his telling of this story of going skating is a presentiment of that. It reveals some of that. So this is also in the before time. This is 1947, maybe 1948. Last winter, on a cold, clear, early January day, Doris and I organized our chores so we could take the afternoon skating with the children on Johns River in South Brookfield. The ice was thick and we had had no snow since the cold weather really set in. So the ice was smooth and open. I truly loved to skate, and the day felt as exciting to me as to my children. This was the place my father brought his own children when the drudgery of his work life overwhelmed him in the dark, early days of winter. That's not what drove me there, not too much work or the wrong work, but everyone needs a sense of cutting free once in a while, and Doris was quick to say yes. She and Dodie put together thermoses of hot chocolate, and Beston and Sonny brought the sled from the shed. They waxed the steel runners with a candle stub and tied a new length of rope to the steering bar. All our outer clothes went behind the truck seat. Dodie got the place beside me and my hand, and the truck filled with happy nonsense and chatter. Johns River is really just a wide, slow creek with overhanging trees and brush protecting muskrat and beaver bank dens. I've always thought it was a very good place, especially for children, because it spools out forward, not like a pond or a lake surrounding you, but a river of ice inviting you away. I love that illusion, that sense of the possibility of going on and away, turning your back and giving yourself over to what you can't see ahead. The muddy landing was frozen, and someone, probably a trapper, had laid a good log down for sitting and a stone break for a small fire. Doris and I helped tighten the laces on the children's skates, Sonny always in new ones, and Dodie and Beston in his hand-me-downs. Dodie complained at the start of each winter about wanting figure skates like her mother's, but she had mastered hockey skates and seemed content when she got on the ice the first time each year. I seldom see Doris in slacks, but I complimented her, saying, "Well, Mr. Center, you are looking very handsome today." I could count on her to laugh, and the children too. "Oh, but I change into a beautiful princess at midnight," she said with her open smile, "if a handsome prince decides to kiss me." My wife is a flirt, which no man ever complains about. Off we went, the sun glinting from the ice and the bare trees and the blue sky itself. I was happy the minute my skates hit the ice. This is something we never forget, the feeling of ice carved by our skates with a rasping swoosh. It is a certain kind of freedom to not make steps, but instead to slide a leg forward, the other leg, the first again, and find yourself suddenly almost free of the world, skimming smoothly and effortlessly into the light. I felt a kind of euphoria, a real elation, and wondered for a minute if my children knew this kind of freedom yet. We circled each other, best in reaching sometimes for Doris's hand or mine, Sunny and Dodie breaking away and swooping along, their arms outstretched, their faces receiving the clean winter light. No one spoke or called out, our skate blades scraping loudly. The children dragged the sled down onto the ice and took turns, two of them stepping into the loop of rope like a harness and pulling the third fast along the river in wide sweeping arcs. And now they shrieked and laughed and taunted one another. I watched Doris pull out of their way and start her silent remembering of a girl's ballet on ice, the twirls and little leaps and hips swishing side to side to go backward. She smiled, embarrassed to be watched, but didn't stop, which pleased me. And I turned away and did my own remembering, the boy hard at hockey roaring low across the ice, feet pointing out to catch the ice and drive the body forward, faster and faster. And when I gained a curve in the river, suddenly the sounds behind me became muffled, and I slowly straightened and focused on the simple, smooth glide of skates on good ice. The memory so strong, I had nothing to say about it. And I lifted my face to the sun and swoosh, 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 swoosh in rhythm. I followed the shining ice. The noise and shouts fell behind me. Daddy, Daddy, where are you going? Dodie called. And the memory of skating and this moment of skating became the same act, and I was gone. I let myself be gone. Dodie's calls left behind. I went forward and I was alone. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. The sun was ahead of me. Nothing was behind me. There were no needs and no expectations and nothing waiting for me. The river curved right and left and farther right. A ribbon laid here for me alone. A crow called from the top of a towering old stave oak, and the sun shone purple against him. I did not rush, taking the river as mine, the silence as mine, the emancipating light as mine. My legs strong and the cold air now stinging my lungs, all mine with nothing secluding me or hindering me or binding me. And so I did not stop. John's River winds smaller and smaller, and finally I knew that I had come a very long way from my responsibilities, and I felt a pang of worry that grew as I turned and pushed my way back. Now it felt like hard work, and the worry grew to a guilt that was crushing, and that I resented and resisted. The light had changed, a warning. And so I found my family seated on the log, the day gone and cold, the hot drinks gone, the truck keys in my pocket. Doris said nothing, and I resented that too. The children told me that they were very frightened that I had gone through the ice, and I said sharply, I didn't go through the ice. I have more sense than that. We rode home in silence with no one's hand in mine, and although I knew that was a child's rebuke, I was not filled with sorrow about it as I might have been. Where had I gone, I wondered, that I felt so distant from this family I love and so sovereign? We are always forgiven, and we made our way again and then again to an afternoon of skating. But we never returned to John's River, as if keeping me from it would preserve us from some sort of sundering. It's tough, and his understanding that there is something for him there that is not altogether owned by his family and his farm. I think I'd like to just speak very quickly about this issue of forgiving, and then open it to questions here, and if the Zoom audience has any questions. So clearly this is a book about whether Doris and Phuc can forgive each other. They carry a guilt that I believe is not truly theirs. I think this truly was an accident. Daniel comes into their lives and marries Dodie, and after this horrendous scene with Dodie down in the shed, it's Daniel once she is back in bed and safe, who in great despair calls all of them away from this guilt, saying, this is a tragedy. Call it what it is. This was a tragedy. And you are harming each other and yourselves by carrying this kind of guilt. So he is asking them to free themselves of guilt. And if he does that, in fact, I believe he's saying there really is not a need for forgiveness for the act that started this whole tragedy. But now the need, the requirement, the hope for forgiveness comes from the responses to that tragedy. Doris really makes herself absent. She says at one point, I have allowed myself to care about grief too much. She's allowed it to take over her life and has failed her children badly, really badly. Top, in his need for his wife's love and forgiveness and connection, behaves very badly and harms a lot of people. So clearly, as this book closes, it is a book about forgiveness. But I also, for me, the title Beneficence is very significant for me. And I believe that every one of us not only carries beneficence, but carries a longing for beneficence, a longing to live in beneficence and share that state of grace and beneficence with the people we love. And it is that, I think, actually more than forgiveness that allows Tup and Doris to find their way back to each other. They say, both of them say, it is different. Things have changed, but we are here again. And their love and their work on the farm and the beauty of the farm and their commitment to their children hauls them back to that center again. So for me, forgiveness is certainly part of the act, but there's something larger than that in my mind that does this work for them. They're inviting each other into that state of beneficence. So those are my comments. If anybody has anything to say or ask, I would love it. If anything is coming in on Zoom.
There is one that came in on Zoom. That's kind of a two-parter. She is asking, she's wondering how much of your experience of teaching young writers strengthened your use of language. Do you have any sense of that?
So I would certainly say that teaching college students who are very new at writing and graduate students who are quite new at writing taught me a lot. The act of teaching requires you to know. And I didn't understand that. I somehow had an intuitive understanding of how writing works and what we're doing as writers. And so any move that writers are making on the page that surprises me teaches me something. I love to have writers, including published writers, give me permission to do things, to break rules. It's all about breaking rules. And when a young writer breaks rules and gets away with it, it works. It's thrilling. And it's thrilling to say to them, that's a writer's move. You pulled that off very nicely. So I certainly would say, yes, I learned a great deal in that way. The language I'm not sure about, just because it's, we work at a very different level. I will say I write listening to Gregorian chants, and I talked about that tunnel. It is a very far away place that I travel to, and the Gregorian chants are wonderful for me. They're not in English. I have no idea what they're saying. They're reverent. They are sacred. They clearly are praising, clearly expressing reverence. And somehow and they are rhythmic. They are very rhythmic. And somehow I've always believed that those Gregorian chants haul me to a place of really deep language. It's a language that I don't speak every day. I knew as I wrote the book, this is not in many places it is spoken language, but there are passages that move into a kind of heightened language that is not my own. And I have always believed that it's that place I go with the Gregorian chants that draws me to that language.
Well, that feeds right into the other thing that this person said. She said she never realized how much richer the words are when you read them aloud. And then thank you and she loved the book. And I would add to that, when I was reading it, I felt like what you were saying about it being sort of episodic at
Yes.
times. And that, especially that piece the selection you just read about the skating, it seemed to me often like each chapter or each section from each character's point of view was almost a whole short story. It was
Yes.
almost a linked series of stories, and the way that the rhythm
Yes.
kept it pushing
Yes.
forward.
Yes,
And I often felt like it was, you have to take a break after. I read a lot of my lunch breaks, so I
Yes.
would read for like 20 minutes,
yes,
and then I would put it down and take a break, and it always sort of concluded.
yes,
And I often felt as though, being read, it was almost written to be read aloud, or as if you were, as if it was being spoken.
yeah, that's very interesting. I hear this language very
Yeah.
clearly in my head. I don't revise, and I don't want this to sound braggartly at all, because there is something else going on, but what you have here is what I wrote, exactly as I wrote it. I did remove about probably, I bet 30 or more pages at the end, because I felt it's a quiet book, and I felt that it needed to not be too long. I didn't want to ask a reader to stay too long inside a quiet book. So I did that on my own, but my editor never asked for any changes at all. It is what it is. But I do know that I write I am so present as I write each word and each sentence, and I move forward a ways, and I don't go very far back. I wouldn't go back to another chapter or another voice. I might go back in Tup's voice to something he said earlier. But I really am moving word to word and sentence to sentence. So it's a very conscious construction, almost like poetry, I think. I'm deeply aware of the language. When the language is right, I know it, I just feel it. So it's easy for me to say, I didn't go back and rewrite this book or write drafts of this book, but there's a process of moving forward and then circling back and combing, and moving forward and circling back and combing. So always within a fairly short passage. And then once that was done, it's interesting. Your comments are really interesting, Hannah, because I always knew when Tup was done speaking or Doris was done speaking.
Mhm.
There was an end to it. That's it. And on to the next person. And once I did that, I never would go back to that. I kept careful notes about logistical things. How old was Doris when they got married? And, how long had they owned the farm when Beston was born? Something like that. I needed to keep those things clear, but that was it. The rest of it was really a very intuitive process. I'll be interested to know. It feels like such a gift to write a book in that way. I created this book, and it was such a gift. Having taught the craft of writing to my students for many years, this was not crafted, it was created. And I don't know if that will ever happen again. I wonder about that. I wonder if this is the story that I had to tell. And so this is how it came onto the page. So I'll let you guys know in 3 or 4 years what happens with this next one. If I'm producing draft after frustrated draft, I'll let you know that. Yes.
So you've spoken about breaking rules.
Yes.
And about this being a quiet book, very focused on language and character, maybe more so than there's a definite plot. But for me, the core emotion is the character and the language. And I know that you work with an independent publisher.
Yes.
Do you think, what was that experience like rather than maybe looking at on one of the big plots? Do you think they would push for more action?
Yes, I
Yeah.
definitely do. I'm certain that they would have.
Yeah.
And it's ironic because if you think about it, there are very large events in this book. A child dies in a horrible accident, and a mother really loses her mind, and a father loses his spirit and gives up, and children and end up drifting, and a child ends up having to step in and mother another child. And this is and Dodie's horrendous scene in that shed one night. These are not small events. And yeah, it is, I know it's a quiet book. And I think if I spoke to an editor at one of those big houses, and they said that it's so quiet, if I listed these things, they would still say this is a quiet
Yes.
book.
I'm inside the now.
Yeah.
Mission is a novel. It has a very similar type of feel. And that's the feedback. Quiet.
So could you start that sentence again? I missed it.
I'm on submission with my baby mom.
Oh,
And
congratulations.
that's our consistent feedback. The writing is beautiful, but it's a little quiet.
Yes,
Even though there's postpartum depression, a secret lesbian love affair.
yes,
A suicide.
yes, yes, right,
Yeah.
right, right. Yes, yeah. It's a different kind of plot that is driving commercial fiction now.
It is.
I will tell you, any of you who write and hope to be published, my experience with Without a Map with Beacon Press was the quintessentially wonderful experience. It was an absolutely extraordinary experience. And Godine, actually, my agent did not sell this book. Godine approached me, and I was a little concerned about it, such a small press, and they have been magnificent and have carried this book a year and a half out. This book is still in the world during a pandemic. And they have just been, my editor, Josh Bodwell, is just the best. So this is not the way. I am blessed that my teaching was my income and I didn't need to make money from this book. And so, you know, because you're a small press just cannot pay. But the relationship between your editor and your press and your book will be really, really satisfying. So.
And did you feel that they did a good job as good a job marketing as one of the bigger houses?
I think that's a complicated question
Yeah.
because I think in some ways, yes, they are able to.
Yeah.
They don't have the sales and marketing team that a big house has, but I have a lot of writer friends who have written beautiful books and lots of promises have come their way and none of what they were promised ever happened. So they just got lost.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've never been lost. Yes.
You were talking about originally that the book was about forgiveness.
Originally,
Originally, you had said the book was a book about forgiveness.
yes.
And then you titled it Beneficence. At what point in the writing of the story did beneficence? Was that,
Well, I will. Yes, nothing happened with a plan. I wrote and things happened.
Did you write Without a Map? Did you say?
Yes, I wrote absolutely without a map. But I will tell you this story. This book for me was titled The Center Place the whole time I wrote it, The Center Place or The Centers. And Josh Bodwell said, this is going to be problematic. People won't know whether that starts with an S or a C, and they're going to get confused. So it's a no. And then we started generating titles. And I can write this and all these words coming up with a title with 3 or 4 words. It's horrible. It's really hard. And we generated lists and I nixed and he nixed. And finally he came up. It was Josh who came up with Beneficence. And I said, I went to lunch with him and the director of the house, David Allen, and we were sitting over lunch and Josh, and he popped this on me. Beneficence? I'm not sure I even know how to pronounce it. People won't know how to pronounce it. It's a big word. I'm not sure I know what it means. And this went on, honestly, for a couple months. And finally I said, okay, it's Beneficence. And I had real misgivings about it. Well, when the copy edits came through, I had a number of places, maybe 15 or 20 places where an absolutely wonderful Lisa Blackman was my copy editor. And she had incredible sensitivity to this kind of language. There's a lot of Yankee language in this, my childhood familiar country language. And she was so wonderful with it. She would point it out and say, are you sure if this is what you mean to say, it's good. And sometimes I realized a general reader would maybe not understand. But that was a pretty joyful experience of collaboration. But as I did it, I was shocked one day in the text to come across the word beneficence. I had used the word beneficence in there, and I was completely shocked by it. And then I kept reading and I came across it again. And I came across it a third time, and I finally did a word search. I used the word beneficence in this book 4 times. And I realized, I don't know why Josh never said to me, you know, it's your word, but he never did that. I went back to Without a Map, written 10 years before. I used beneficence once in Without a Map. And I wouldn't have told you that I even really understood what it means, but apparently it's a really, really important concept to me. So it's a very long answer to come back to you and say, I think that without knowing it, I think that I personally live in the world hoping for and believing in this beneficence that we carry and longing for it. I think in many ways, expecting it in other people, and that's what comes then. That's what I look for, and that's what comes. And I think that is so much a part of me that just seeped into this book. And it was only at the end when I had to confront the issue of how does this thing end? Really, the question was, do Doris and Tup ever find their way back to each other, or don't they? And if they don't, what does that look like? And one of my questions was, what do my readers need? How much can they tolerate? Can they tolerate moving through this entire book and finding out that in the end, the whole thing was blasted to smithereens and they never did fix this? And I thought, you know, that's not how you live. You would have fixed this. You would have found your way back. You would have made your way back into that marriage. You would have expected your husband to make his way back into the love that you had shared. And so it was at that point that I started to understand that the book was circling around to a very specific kind of forgiveness, the forgiveness within a marriage. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yes.
Anything else? Any other questions? Is that it? I have really enjoyed having this small group, and I love talking with women. It's just lovely to have a room full of women to talk these ideas. I always worry that I need to somehow change the language or change the heart if there's a male who might have other expectations. So this has been really a joy. Thank you. So, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. A pleasure. I'd also